So in this case, one day I was talking about architecture, and then I put questions there so students can actually go through the questions they have. Here's communication is extremely key. So basically, the online communication. So basically, essentially, every class before the class is happening, I would put in details about what is happening today, what are the details of the class, what is happening on the next week, so students can be prepared. My MBA program was primarily, I had students from the Pentagon, people who are working, so therefore I would give them advance notice on what to prepare for the next 3 weeks as well. In terms of delivering content, when I am delivering, my video is always on. I always keep a class list window available so that I can ask students. Some students will complain, like all students do, about warm and cold calls, but I let them know in advance that I would, if you're in class and your participation, there's a participation grade, so make sure you come prepared, and I will call on folks as well. Asking good questions, I definitely make sure that you have great questions available. I also make sure that the students are engaged. So if I'm doing a project management, I will give them a case about, say, for instance, scope management, or I would give them something about risk, and then give them a role of the CEO of a company, or I give them a role of their IT manager, things like that, so that they can go ahead and work through those and be engaged as part of the class. The other option I wanted to also mention, and this is something that I learned from the Harvard School of Business as well, is when you develop materials, make sure that the students know that every week on, say, Wednesday of that week, the materials are available for a class on Friday. Typically, my classes were Monday and Wednesday, and my project management class was on Thursday. So I would have materials for this by the weekend. So Saturday or Sunday, the materials will be online, and therefore with details about what is due that week and as well. The second piece was, publish scenarios and questions earlier. This is something that would really, really help because students will. This will also allow the students to actually read the materials. It will, entice them to do that, and then, of course, answer questions earlier as well. And then, as I mentioned, class discussions are very, very key for that purpose too. I created an online recording. I'm sorry, because of privacy reasons, I could not. But here is how we would record every class, and that recording can be played like a video. And then you have questions that my students could ask as to where they could find the PowerPoint or things like that. So this is after class, they can go back and review. So many of my students, before the exam, would go back and listen to all of the lectures online, look at the questions, look at the discussion groups, so they're better prepared as well. Engaging students in class. I will not, be shy about this, because students, it's extremely harder to, students that are working through, what can I say? When they're not in front of you, because sometimes they might turn the video on or turn the recording on and walk away. So typically, I tell my students, class participation, I actually put grades on it and say, if you are in class and attendance, there is a level of participation there, as well as when I call on you, and if you're answering, there's a participation on that. The way I encourage them is to say that, in today's day and world, you have to also entice them to explain to them, as soon as they step out of your college, they are going into a world where they will need public speaking skills, whether it's for an interview, whether it's for any kind of engagement. So therefore, it was extremely important to them that they work with the instructors to learn how to speak publicly, answer questions, things like that. One of the items I always try to do is, even if there are 60 students in the class, I address each student personally. So basically, I would definitely say, Laura, please help me answer this question, or, Saket, answer this question, things like that. So therefore, This allows a lot of class participation. The student feels that the teacher is also extremely engaged, or the professor is also engaged. So that is something that you can use. Some class activities can include me talking for a long time never goes well. So I typically include external videos. There is always discussion groups. I have a separate page for breakout discussions. I strongly recommend that. If there are polls, as I mentioned early, and then encouraging hand raises as well. So Scott Stenger is a professor, professional at the Army, and he always says, if you don't pay attention to all of the students where they're located, they will become disengaged and disappointed. So therefore, it is critical that you find ways so that students can be engaged. It's more challenging than it is in person. So I've been talking a lot about this breakout rooms, and I'm a strong believer in this. So what this is this is a function feature that I have used in Zoom as well. In Zoom, this is a it's a online meeting app. What we do there is I would go through a piece of lecture. Say, for instance, in my information systems and analysis, I have a case for a company, and I would then break the students into groups of 4 or 5 and give them that case scenario and say, here, this is the user requirements analysis scenario. Go into this breakout room, and group A focus on finding out what are the functional requirements. Group B focus on finding out what are the non-functional requirements. Group C work on architecture. And so you give them these questions separately, and each group leader will then go through the in that group and have that discussion. So it's like encouraging, inter-student participation as well. And then after 8 to 10 minutes, I bring them back out, and then we discuss this in class. And by this time, all of the students are very engaged. We're up to date in topics. They have received the content, and it's much more interesting than me talking through a series of slides. So I've found that students retain a lot more when I do this type of exercises with them. And then, of course, after the classroom, I definitely would encourage discussion groups covering certain topics. Having students do presentations and group projects are extremely recommended, because that will allow them to apply the concepts that you're teaching. And of course, I strongly encourage my students to also form study groups so that they can prepare for exams together, things like that. In my case, in addition to in class, I also provide office hours, oftentimes in the evening, with Zoom calls, video. This allows for 2 things: one, for me to learn more about the students, and one, for the students to understand how I am, if they have questions, things like that. And I've had students that have asked for weekend hours, things like that, going over projects, going over their system design, things like that, project plan, and things like that. I often sometimes, when the breakout rooms are in there, I actually go into the breakout rooms and ask questions, ask them if they have any questions for me. This is how you will also, build that relationship that you need with the students as well, making sure they understand the content. Very, very, one of the key recommendations I always hear from all other professors is be email responsive. I tell my students, because I work, I will respond to their email within 24 hours. And that is a expectation I set with my students. During exam times, especially because the students don't have the ability to meet you in person, what I do is I create 1 or 2 review sessions where they can talk to me. And then I'm able to also answer their questions via private chat during these exams as well. Again, back on the exam side, typically I would divide that into 4. One is the project-based evaluation with projects with real-life examples, some exams which are short answers and case-based questions. Of course, class participation and presentation. And then some of the presentations that I do is because especially in our industry, things are moving faster than we can teach students. I actually give them presentation topics on current industry trends. This tends to keep them very, very motivated and interested, because the way I tell them is, hey, if you know all this, when you go to an interview, you will be able to, present yourself much better. So this allows them to research more as well. So for instance, in the information system side, I talk to them about, how to use DevOps and agile method. In the project management side, I talk about artificial intelligence, go ask them to go research and present about artificial intelligence in project management, things like that. And then last but not the least, I know this slide is a little bit small, but we can definitely send this out, is my personal strategies are, load the syllabus and lock it down, develop and deliver this early on for part-time students. For case studies, basically, you add the questions beforehand. So most of them, so students can prepare, but also some you would want to keep them and be available so students are able to also learn the strategy of effective, in-person management. Definitely plan your classes out, using the breakout questions and the breakout rooms. I often start the session 10 minutes early so students can actually log in, get familiar with it. I ask students to, questions on how things are going. Is there anything they wanted me to start in front of, before the class begins? Things like that. I often also relate some of the videos to I open up with the video related to, let's say, risk management before the class starts, so that they know that this is how it relates to the real world. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, using the iPad. And then I also ask the students to go in and say, hey, I'm loading the materials by Sunday, so please make sure you read them. And then, of course, providing study and review sessions. I'm very big on that because I want to make sure that they understand the material. So that is pretty much, I know I've spoken quite a bit. That is pretty much all I had in terms of my presentation. So please let me know if you have any questions here.
Thank you, Mrs. Sindhurajan, for enriching us with the new modes of teaching. I hope that we as teachers and instructors will make sure that we practice and familiarize ourselves with technology and would make note of the key points and teaching tools highlighted by you and incorporate in our class sessions. Because a good teacher is one who always keeps learning and has good interaction with the students. Now, dear participants, the question and answer session is opened. I request and I call upon Dr. D. Unica, Associate Professor, Department of Commerce, the moderator of the session, to kindly take over.
Hello.
Hello. Yes,
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you very much, ma'am. That was indeed a great presentation and good knowledge sharing. And my special thanks for starting the session with a good technical warm up. Thank you so much. Yeah, there are a few questions from the chat box, but let me begin with this. Online teaching method is really a great gift at times when the crisis hit, especially during the pandemic situation. But will this really replace the personal or the traditional teaching method?
So was that the question to me on whether this will replace the real teaching method?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm not sure I can predict that, but however, I think the interactive nature of in-person teaching is always going to be missed when you're doing online. However, there is so much advances in technology using web, video and things like that, that will certainly help. So I think, it may not replace it as much as you think it would be. So in some courses, it's hard to teach. For instance, if you're in medicine and you need to do a lab, it is extremely hard to do that in online.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am, we, especially the Indians, like we are in the transition period, especially of the online teaching. Can you just tell me what are the general challenges that we may encounter during this transition period?
I think primarily setting expectations with your students is going to be, is one of the biggest challenge. So and even though, there's so much online teaching in the US, my semester in the last spring semester, all my classes were in person. So teaching that from online to in person, in person to online was difficult because the students were so used to walking into class 10 minutes before I would be there talking to me in person. So it is important that you create something similar, like an environment. As I was talking, maybe open up your classroom 15 minutes before, turn your video on, make sure you're available. So that is one. The other challenge, especially if you are if you have subjects where you are teaching students where you have a lot of things to draw, writing equations, things like that. One of the biggest challenges is to make sure that you have some kind of a material to transition to, in doing this, maybe an iPad or where it's easy to draw and things like that is important. So those were the two things that I thought were, student engagement and, using interactive technology were the two big challenges.
Okay, thank you. That is indeed the right one. Before I could move on to the next question, I really encourage the participants to post your questions in the chat box. Ma'am, there are two questions actually from the chat box, which is similar. I guess this is from the faculty, those who are handling their max and the statistical paper. They are asking you to suggest the best online teaching mode for teaching max and the statistical papers.
So, can I ask the person who said that? I don't know who it was, but to tell me what are they talking about in terms of math? Is it the teaching of problems? Is it, or
Yeah, formulas and problems.
yeah. So primarily, what I would suggest, again, if the challenge is how do you write the problems out and how do you engage it, I would certainly invest in something where you can draw easily or write easily. If that's the question, I don't know if it's the content or is it the technology they're talking about. But if it's the technology, that is what I would suggest that they do. Use the tablets to do that. The other thing, for instance, it's not as much math as it is, but I think it would be primarily, like I used to teach for my project management class, I had to teach earned value analysis. So for that, what we did is we actually went ahead, learned the concepts. Created slides to show that. I created a video and animation to show that. And then after that, we did problems in class using the iPad and tablets. And then I gave students exercises and homework to do after the fact. And then they came and asked me questions. So I had small discussion groups after class so that they could come back and ask me questions in a smaller setting as well. So those are the things I would recommend.
Okay. Like before I could move on to the next question, ma'am, there is a overwhelming appreciation for your presentation in the chat box, and a few more similar questions. People are much worried about like how to handle the max and the accounts related paper on the online teaching methodology. I think you have answered for that.
So can I ask the person who I'm just looking at the chat option here. I think it was S. Manjula. So is she talking about how to teach technology, but in technology, or I would like to understand that a little bit more better so I can answer appropriately.
I think the participants are muted, ma'am.
Oh, okay. I mean, they can put it in chat as well because I can see it.
Yeah. And the next question is, since you are a teaching person, one who has experienced and used so many online mode of teaching, can you suggest me which mode is the best one as far your observation and experience is concerned?
So in terms of mode of teaching, do you mean to say delivery of content or tools? Can you elaborate?
Yeah, tools. So for example, now,
Yeah. So my tools today are the following. So for my project management class, I primarily use Zoom because my school recommends either Zoom or WebEx. I use Zoom because they have great breakout sessions because project management is extremely interactive and discussion based. So my tools are primarily Zoom. I use Adobe Captivate for recording things if I wanted to do screen recordings. I also use my iPad for interactions, and so those are the combination of things that I use for teaching. And then for my lectures, I primarily use PowerPoint, and then I record over it for my pre-recorded sessions. And for my learning management system, because the school provides Canvas, I use that.
Okay, that's so many tools to supplement your teaching.
Right.
Yeah, there's one more question in the chat box, and the question goes like this. I have a basic question. The online teaching methodology, is it done individually or assigned by the organization? Does the class conducted is monitored and controlled by the organization?
So my university gave us a few options because they wanted to make sure that whatever the student was familiar with, they could use. I mean, so the instructors were familiar with. So we had Zoom, we had WebEx. I chose Zoom. So my suggestion is, as instructors, maybe you can meet with your college and talk about which of the two works for you, and then go from there as well.
Okay. And one more. In my workplace, we get students from all background. In that case, how online teaching will be effective? And can you suggest some measures? And some of the students are not affordable for this technology. Please comment on this, ma'am.
Okay, so I would suggest if you have students who have bandwidth problems, which in many cases, my recommendation would be is to primarily two options. One is to either pre-record your slides and put them in video. I know many of them have the ability to watch it asynchronously, and then the other option would be to go ahead and record your lectures where students who have attended, and then make that available. And then last but not the least, go ahead and also offer a lot of office hours, which is what I have done when students said, oh, my bandwidth was down or my internet connection was wrong. I would put in at least 3 days a week. I had office hours where they could sign up. I had 2 days of group office hours and 1 day of individual where students could sign up for 20 minutes each, so that if they have any specific questions, they could listen to the lectures and use that as well.
There is an interesting comment. Ma'am, we miss eye contact and face reaction.
Yes. So one of the things I totally get that. When we transitioned this last spring, it was extremely difficult for me because I am very hands-on person. So I do ask students to go ahead and if they're willing to do so, because the lecture is recorded, to turn on their video. Typically, that is a bandwidth issue, but if there isn't, many of them do. So in my project management class, they all kept their videos on, especially my class was in the evenings. So there was a little bit less of use of bandwidth. And that would certainly help. So I even have seen students, sometimes when they're puzzled, I can ask them, did you understand this? Do you have any questions on this? So, and the other thing, just to be also serious, is if video is not an option, ask students to ask the question, right? Ask the question. Ask them to please put it in chat. Raise your hands. Ask the questions, and you ask this thing as well. I typically do. This was very difficult for me to say hold off questions to the end here in this section. But after every topic, I would stop and say, "Hey guys, do you have any questions for me?" I would ask questions just to make sure they understood. So those are critical to accommodate when you're not in person.
Ma'am, one more question. Ma'am,
Mhm.
I own an academy where about 40 students of different classes are there. I require an environment to create like physical and virtual classroom. I have around 8 faculties around and doing classes in Google Meet. I required one platform where I'm able to manage students' attendance as well as the faculties. How to solve this problem?
So I'm not sure if you're able to invest in a learning management system. If you are, for instance, my university uses something called Canvas, and there are other e-learning tools as well, where you can actually, it's just like registering all of the students, all of the faculty, and then you can go ahead and create classrooms for each of their classes, even multiple sessions. And then from there, you can also go ahead and then assign students to one or more classes so that it's just like them attending different groups. And within Canvas, it's also linked to, say, Zoom. So when an actual classroom time comes up within that Canvas, you can go ahead and start the classroom session. So you can manage everything in that particular learning management system. So basically, I would say you may have to invest in a learning management system to handle it in a way. That way you can understand attendance, class participation, things like that. Zoom is also a great way to handle that as well.
Yeah. Uh, Thank you, ma'am. I think more than the questions, it's all about the appreciation it's pouring in for you. Thank you very much. And indeed, you have answered for the specific questions uh, of the participants those who have answered. Now over to Tiana.
Sorry for the interruption, Unica ma'am. Unica ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
There is one more question raised in question and answer thing. This is the question to Sindhu ma'am. How to be more familiar with the virtual tools for teaching, learning, pedagogy to cyberbullying if you're not very technically sound to handle it yourself?
Can you repeat the question? How to be most familiar with what?
Virtual tools for
Mhm.
teaching, learning, pedagogy to
Uh-huh.
cyberbullying if you are not very technically sound to handle it yourself.
So I would say two things. One, I had mentioned leverage your technical team. When I mean, for me it was okay, but I had a lot of professors or colleagues. For instance, I had a professor of statistics who's probably not used technology much. I had a professor colleague who was a professor of chemistry who had not used at all. What they did is the university gave us training sessions, and then during the first one or two or three classes, if you can have your technology person in the class for the first 30 minutes. So I had, I would ask that you recommend that to your university so that they can have that person stay in your class for the first 30 minutes so that you get used to it. And if there are questions, you can answer. So that is something that I would highly recommend. And of course, practice sessions as well.
Yes, ma'am. You are right. Like we literally understood the need of this online mode, but what is needed is the training and the mode of orientation of these tools.
Correct.
Uh, yeah.
Correct. So I would suggest just, once you do the training, run some mock classes, and
Yeah.
definitely, because it is new to students as well, I would definitely ask that you do, as I mentioned, take the first 30 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes of your first two classes and go over technology. That way you get used to it as well as they would as well. So
Ma'am, any other question, ma'am?
I see one question here from someone who says, what's the best to decrease stress when it comes to studying classes online? Recommendation for students is to read your materials beforehand, come prepared, and then make use of the instructor's office hours. That would be my answer. Are there any other questions for me, Unika?
Yes. Oh, yes, ma'am. Meena, ma'am. Meena, ma'am. Hello.
We can hear.
Yeah, Meena, ma'am. I think the questions in the chat box are over. Can we proceed?
Over, ma'am. Over.
Yeah. Can we proceed, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am.
Over to Tiana now.
Thank you, ma'am. As the day has come to an end and the session we have ended, a note of thank you is always a grateful thing to say from the heart. So I now call upon Mrs. T. Vaidegi, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to render the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Diana. On behalf of Postgraduate and Research Department of Commerce, Shift 1 and IQAC, it is my privilege to propose vote of thanks for Day 1 FDP program. Our sincere thanks and gratitude to Mrs. Sindhu Rajan for a wonderful presentation. Thank you, ma'am. I thank our panelists, Dr. Geeta ma'am, Dr. Meena ma'am, Dr. Nagajodi ma'am, Dr. Unika ma'am, Mr. Daniel, IQAC coordinator, Sunita ma'am, for their valuable contribution and constant support. I take this opportunity to thank our director, Mountain Rex Dhanapal, Director Dr. Fatima Vasan, Principal Dr. Usha Judge. Thank you, Dr. Durai and Tiana, for all the support. Thank all the participants for your active participation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Well, my dear viewers and participants, we truly had a wonderful, enriching session, and we hope to have a fruitful session for the next few days. So until then, we shall meet you again tomorrow at 4 p.m. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, ma'am.
So, thank you all. I want to specially mention Mr. Martin, Assistant Professor, Department of School of Medias. And I want to share with all the participants the feedback link for the today's session is shared in the chat box. It will be remained for 10 more minutes. Just click the link to give your feedback. I thank our keynote speaker, Sindhu Rajan ma'am. Thank you so much. And sorry for the technical problem in the initial period. I'm so sorry. And also to the participants. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. Bye.